Next, we have another report, and this one is on our third quarter school resource officer activities. So Superintendent Kingsley, if you'd lead us off with that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure thing. Reviewing our district's third quarter school resource officer presentation is our Executive Director of Operations, Mr. Matt Bryan. Matt, welcome. Thank you. It's good to see you too.
Are you leaving?
You're coming.
Don't worry about it. He was thinking.
All right, looks like we're on. Well, thank you, Board of Education, for having me here tonight to review our third quarter SRO data. And I am pleased to be here tonight. For the next 2.5 hours, I will walk you through this presentation. Hey, they left me plenty of time here.
Does anybody want a break first?
But as always, it's good to be a part of this presentation. And before I get started, I just want to say thank you to our SROs and our police services, our teachers, our school staff, our administrators and our security staff, and our community partners that are all part of this program. They're all part of the success of this program and the input that we've had. And I think we've got some good data to share. And it hasn't been easy to develop this data this year. For the first time ever, we're tracking some of this. But they have worked hard to bring some good data to us that I can share with you tonight. I will also warn you tonight that I'm playing two roles here. My partner, my teammate, is pretending to be sick at home, Scott Nielsen. But there's good news to that, because more than likely your names and your identities will remain in place tonight, and you won't be called past employee names. So I'll do my best to keep that from happening. So, but we miss Scott, and I will do my best to fill his shoes. They're not easy to fill because he is a lot better speaker than I am, but I'm going to do my best with the data that he provided me and the study time that we spent together. So first off, make sure I do that right. I want to just remind you of the key terms and definitions that we have available to us as we go through this presentation for your reference back. There's also some one change from this in this presentation that's from the packet that you have, and I will point that out when we get there. There was a little language tweak that we didn't catch until after we had submitted this, but I'll explain that when we get there. But your key terms and definitions there, we'll explain what our SOPs, our SROs, and then our police agencies that we work with, our Department of Human Services, and then some definitions that around calls and assist and dispositions that have had questions in the past, and so we wanted to make sure that we clarified those before we move on. This first slide, this next slide you are familiar with. This is the timeline that we offered at the end of last school year and the development of this reporting period that we did this school year. And you can see that we are now up to May 22. And our steering analysis is almost complete for the year. We do have one final steering committee meeting tomorrow, actually, where we'll be discussing next steps and items to bring to the board on May 24th. But also over the last 3 to 4 weeks, Norm Bastian, our security manager, and myself and police services representatives have been negotiating contracts. Autumn has been reviewing those as we go. I can report that those have gone very well. There's if any, there's not any real major changes that will shock you when we bring those contracts. Like anything else, we do expect some price increases. That's just part of the game that we're playing right now in the economy that we're in. But I believe the police services agencies have been responsible with their asks, and the contracts are looking good. The SOPs will also be part of that again, will be part of the contract again. There's some minor changes to the SOPs. We were able to get through this year without bringing any major changes to the board or to councils and commissioners for changes. It's minor language changes that we will point out to those when we get to those here later in the month. This next slide, again, is kind of a recap of the training, the collaborative actions that we've had with our partners in the community, our LCSO partners, our Fort Collins Police Services and Timnath, and then, of course, our assistant principals and our principals that have been involved in these trainings and this co-work. And you can see that we're coming up on our summer development, and you can see that integrated services and our SRO response, they are working together as we get closer to that over the summer. IS and Fort Collins Police Services are going to develop a training focused on the SRO response to integrated service students when they have issues. That's going to be important work, and because of that important work and as extensive as we think that's going to be, we did decide to move that training to the summer instead of trying to cram it in May when everybody's got things going. So I think that was a smart move on their part to make that decision and recommendation. We are planning on taking place for a fall group work session between administrations and the SROs, much like we did last fall, where we'll bring them together. Last fall was very successful in solidifying the meaning and the work behind the SOPs. We want to continue that work, so in the fall there'll be another training session that'll be joint work there. And last fall it was really fun to kind of see scenario work where they broke up in groups, and hopefully we can have some good work like that again that's meaningful to them and with those expectations going into next school year. And so this is where I'm going to put on my Scott Nielsen hat, and I'll do my best here to go over the data that has been shared from the district and kind of corresponds with some of the Fort Collins Police Service referrals. And we'll get into the other agencies and their referral services here in just a few minutes in some later slides. But what we want to talk about, and this came up from a question asked by the board in the Q2 presentation about, you know, we're talking about referring students to our Family Outreach Center and to our restorative justice programs. What does that look like once they get in there? Or do we know who's completing it and who's not, and what happens if they don't, and so forth? So we looked for the data in that, and Fort Collins Police Service referrals. You can see the numbers there. This is where one of the changes came in your packet. That last number of 44 was labeled wrong. The correct title for those 44 is completed or are in process. You can see out of the 44 direct referrals from Fort Collins, you can see that the 4 have not successfully completed the program. Once they do not successfully complete the program, that means that they'll either go back into a citation status or into the expulsion program for the district, depending on the circumstance. We continue to see some positive outcomes, or a lot of positive outcomes, for students who have moved through these direct referrals. An example of a direct referral, we had an incident on a school bus a while back at one of our schools. There was 4 students involved in that incident. All 4 students could have received tickets, citations for their actions on the bus. Instead, worked through the SROs and with the administration, a restorative justice process was presented to the students in lieu of a ticket. And so now those students are part of the system working through those restorative justice, and that's just an example of how well that works and the collaboration that we have with our partners there. All the students that have completed the district referral service on the district side, you see the numbers there. Those 20 that have completed it successfully, if there was any drug charges or any kind of drug actions there, part of that successful completion is to pass a drug test. And so that's part of that program, and you can see that we've had 20 that have completed successfully and 14 that have been revoked for various reasons. The individuals that were revoked may have had another drug offense, or in some cases maybe a victim-related offense, an assault or something like that, or they just chose not to complete the program on their own. I've been able to witness some great work with this referral service and these restorative justice processes through the SRO meetings that happen. I haven't been able to attend all of them, but the ones I have attended, I think I alluded to this in the Q2 report as well, that there's just some awesome collaboration there. You have representatives of SROs, district mental health, county mental health, city mental health, the district attorney's office. The emotions that the officers and these representatives from these partners show when they start discussing kids and the alternatives that they want to provide and the services that they want to expand for these students, it gets a little overwhelming at times because they really do have a big heart for these kids, and it shows through these actions, and I think you're going to see that as the data comes through. So major discipline events referred to, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Matt, do you want to take questions now, or do you want to wait till the end?
I can go either way. Yeah, I can go now if you
Go
will.
It's
ahead.
about the last slide. Can you tell me with that data, how, is that up through the third quarter? Is that, what is the span of that data there?
This data is up through the third quarter. Most of the data you see tonight was collected before spring break. Because we just needed that time to get that data together, and then we had spring break, so that kind of would have affected the data collection. So most of this is up through spring break.
And for all of what we're going to be seeing?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, most of it is.
Go ahead, Nate.
Yes, with respect to these referrals, can you give us an idea of the range of like the time frame that the program might run? Might it be a very short to like a semester, or how long do they run, or are they sometimes under it for a whole year?
I think that depends a lot, and I'm sorry I don't have the right answer, but I do know that it varies, and it's going to vary by the action and vary by the referral. But there is an extensive program usually that they complete, especially at the Family Outreach Center. They're very thorough in the programs that they put these students through because they want them to be successful after they leave. I will find out, though, if we can get more specific information as to times for, if it's by incident, I'll see if we can collect that for you. Okay? Good question, though. Scott probably could have answered that. Major discipline events referred to law enforcement. So this represents a comparative data that we've had. We've used 2018 and 2019 for obvious reasons because of the COVID years, a time frame that we had to not collect data or just didn't have normal operations, right? So this year we've been fairly normal in our operations. So going back to 2019, we had discipline data for that. So that's the comparative years that we look at. This data was also shared with you last time and is now updated to the end of the third quarter. The pattern remained consistent for this year with majors down in the percentage. Referred to law enforcement, it was drastically down, as you can see here. In 2018, we had 4.28% of our majors were referred to law enforcement. As you can see, the school year and through this point in time with the presentation, we're at 1.31% as a district referring to law enforcement. And again, I thank the teachers at the end of it and the administrators, but I think this shows a lot of sense of belonging that they're trying to build in the schools and working through the administration instead of just working through law enforcement to do our discipline. Yes, sir.
So that part's excellent in and of itself. If I'm looking at the numbers at the bottom, though, in addition, the number of discipline events is like in half. Is that correct?
Yes.
And to what do we attribute that?
That's the big question, I think, and that's what we're trying to collect through data, is trying to see why are the numbers down, and what is the basis behind that. But I don't know that we have that clear answer right now.
I'll be curious as you
Okay.
begin to understand that better.
I'll make a note. We'll see if we can work on that a little bit. We did also, so that was talking with the administration about, you know, what are they seeing and seeing in these percentages, but also we wanted to know what the police services thought. You know, what are they seeing and why are the numbers down and why are the percentages lower and what do they think about that? They contribute a lot of it to the SOPs, the clarity that's been provided in the SOPs for the roles that they play. That has been very specific to that. The other reason is now that SROs are able to say scenario X, they look at it and they say, you know what, we think that's better handled in school by the administration than in school. So they make that choice to pass that on to the schools with support, but not leading the way and not handling the discipline there. So major discipline events referred to law enforcement using Hispanic students. We do use this category of students because we want to show the decline that we've had in this particular group, but also you can see that we had a fairly high percentage in 2018 and 2019 when we started our work looking at the SRO program. That was 4.7%. You can see now in 21-22, the percentage of Hispanic students referred to law enforcement is 1.2%, which is lower than the district average, which is, I think, is something to be celebrated because I think it does show that we are conscientiously using our SOPs and our SROs in a very efficient and proper manner. So that's, any questions on this one? Sorry. Okay, it's pretty much the same data as the previous one. How SROs were notified. So this is a slide that you're familiar with that you've seen in all the other previous presentations. One of the things I do want to clarify is what is dispatched. We've had that question asked in a couple of other times and viewers of this when we've presented it for a preview. This is when someone would call 911 during the day or even during the night, but it could be on property or off property. And we're tracking it because it involves one of our students. So when the police services take a call and it's a 911 call, and then they respond and they find out it's a PSD student, they automatically start tracking it so that we can include it in our data. That was something that wasn't done in the past, and that required some coordination and some effort on their work for logistic-wise, and we appreciate seeing that. I think you can see a couple of categories there that have gone up or that have stayed stable. One of them is student reported, and safe to tell, you can see it kind of stayed stable there. Runaway reports are really low, but I think you can see just kind of where that data is lying as far as how SROs are being used and notified of incidents. This is a busy slide. As you can see, the first quarter is on here, the second quarter and the third quarter data is all on here. I'm hoping the colors are good enough for you to see the definition of them. You can see up top the dates that this data was collected. Again, March 11th for the third quarter was chosen before spring break to collect this. And then in your top right corner, in addition to this slide that hasn't been on previous presentations, is the first quarter, second quarter, and third quarter data broke down by totals. That total for the year is 1,456 assists and calls. There's three categories that may stand out and I want to call attention to while you're looking at this. One of them is the child abuse area that has a significant increase there, and then you see the harassment line is way up there in the numbers. And then the sex offense reports are up. We do not know exactly why the harassment line has gone up, but we have verified with Fort Collins Police Services that the data is correct. Third quarter is equal to the same number as the first quarter and second quarter put together. Those reports have come. You can summarize why in many ways. We're going to continue to monitor this through the fourth quarter to see what the trend is and see again if we can identify any trends that might be coming up that are obvious. Yes, sir.
Matt, can I ask you a question? For the public and for the board, do you happen to have a consistent, like how do we define harassment? What are some of the things that fall under that umbrella?
So harassment has a wide range of things. You can think of what your obviously would be, if somebody punches you or attacks you, is robbing you, that could also be a harassment. But one of the other minor things that can happen, it could be a simple push. Somebody could report to the SRO that somebody pushed them in the hallway, and it could have been a shoulder in the hallway. And when they investigate, it could be found out that, it wasn't intentional, it was just a crowded hallway. Spitting on somebody is harassment. Screaming at them in their face can be considered harassment. So it's got a wide range of items. You can look at this data and think that, well, students are more comfortable now. They feel like if they say something, they see something, they say something, then there's going to be action to it. That may be why, we see an increase in this number as well. But that's a great question.
Does what I guess we would traditionally think of as bullying fall under this category? as
Bullying
well?
would fall under that, certain types of bullying, obviously. Bullying to an extent where, there's severe physical harm would then cross over into the assault area.
Into an
But, yeah.
assault, right, but calling people names on a consistent basis or whatever might fall into this category?
Yeah, and there was an interesting conversation about calling somebody's phone 30 times a day. Used to be considered harassment. I think that's changing in the law now, from what I understood at the last SRO meeting. But again, that's an example of harassment, is when you're just badgering somebody.
Okay. DJ, you had a question?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that real quick because every time I've read this report, I keep having those kind of questions about some of these categories. And I don't necessarily want to put more work on your staff or the SRO group, but it would be awesome if we could have, like you kind of did the definitions at the start, like assault is another one that I always have to try to think about. How do you guys classify assault? And then now, and I'm actually a little more confused because you just mentioned a couple things in the harassment which could fall under that too. And so just to be able to wrap our head around some of these, it would be great if you guys were able to put, I'm just bullet points type of thing to give
Absolutely,
me
yeah, we
ideas
can
or
provide
something.
that.
That would be great to
Yeah.
have on that.
I know when we were investigating this and asking this, I asked the same question of the Fort Collins Police Services, what is this? What is this? And they were able to provide me either the letter of the law, which spells it out. So, we would be happy to provide that and forward that onto the board as well
Thank you.
for clarification. And bringing me to the next one, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Not yet. Kristen has a question.
Sorry, one question is it possible, and I know this sounds like a lot of work, but is it possible to cross-reference some of the reporting types with the types of calls? So for instance, I'm curious if the self-reporting cross-referenced with the suicidal call assist, I'm just curious if that's more of a self-reporting or if there are more, it's being called in from teachers or if it's being called in from parents. And then maybe certain ones that we could pull out for mental health reasons that we could pull out and see where that's being reported, how it's being reported, and how we can help with that.
I think that's a great question to ask, and we'll pursue that. Thank you.
Oh, Carolyn, go ahead.
So could that harassment also be between students but off campus or out of school hours?
It could be, that would go under kind of, if it was called in on 911, that would be in the previous slide, where that data came in at. But yeah, this could be if an SRO has responded to it.
And it could, and I'm guessing it does include social media stuff, right?
It
Social
can,
media
yeah,
harassment.
it can include harassment on social media.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead, Matt.
Okay. So want to call out the next category of sex offense, because that line is rather, has grown from quarter to quarter as well. We had a decline in the second quarter, but obviously this third quarter has taken a jump. And so here's where I would like to offer some definitions to sex assault or sex offense, because again, we're not sure why it's risen. I can report, though, that none of the sex offense calls on here resulted in any citations. So they were investigated and they were found not to be victim-related or any criminal offense. So there were no citations issued. Does not mean that maybe some restorative justice wasn't put into effect with that student in lieu of a citation, but we did not do any citations there. Sex offense could be sex assault, felony unlawful sexual contact, sexual assault on a child, sexual assault child by one in a position of trust, enticement of a child, or internet luring of a child. Those are just examples of what that definition of that could be. So you can imagine the kind of reports that are coming in and the investigation that's involved in trying to find out the proper action to be taken on those. And total for this slide for calls and assist was 1,456. Our next slide is our disposition. So this is where we take those calls and assists, and we see, what are we going to do with them? What is the proper actions that are being taken for our Fort Collins Police Services SROs, and where are they heading with the charges or threat assessments. You can see on here there are quite a few categories that had anywhere from small increases to a little bit larger increases. One of them that stood out to me was the adult parent issue. So I did clarify that. What would that be? The adult parent use issue in this category is usually on site, so it's happened on PSD property. It could be criminal mischief. It could be family problems, an abuse or a welfare check. Items like that is what a parent issue would be. The 3 blanks that you see there, those are just duplicate forms or errors while submitting. They don't really have any specific data connected to them. And on this page, disposition-wise, really close to the other numbers, 1,458 dispositions total for the year, 456 for the third quarter. Are there any questions on this page that I could help with? You can see that under investigation did grow. I think, if you see the sexual assault, if you go back to those cases, I mentioned that, investigation could be pretty extensive in those. So some of these may have some crossover as they go through their investigative process. Yes, sir.
Go ahead, DJ.
The standard response was one that jumped out to me in here, and just trying to understand what that meant.
Standard response protocol is, and I think that's a good question too, because I think we've had that question with them many times. So I believe that the standard response protocol is usually just when they get called for. I'm going to mess this up. Standard response. I'm going to get back to you. I've got a blank in my head right now. I apologize for that. So
Sounds good. Thank you.
I'll get back to you on that. I don't want to mess that up. Any others?
Go ahead.
Fort Collins Police Service, the next slide, we'll talk about the juvenile citations and tickets that were issued. You can see that there has been an increase in the citations and tickets issued. There are 8 categories that increased. If you look down through there, one of our largest increases, none of them have really been huge, but our trespass increase was 3. Thing to remember about this slide is some of these actions, some of these tickets are one student receiving multiple citations, depending on how they're charged for the incident. So it doesn't necessarily mean that's 20 students. There could be multiple students in there that have contributed to multiple categories of incidences there. Out of the 48 citations that were issued to students, 4 of them were IEP or 504 plans, which was asked at the last quarter's presentation that we find that number. So there were 4 integrated service students involved with citations for their actions. And then if you look to the right, you can see that our numbers for our ethnicities. One thing I want to point out is the police services do not ask students their ethnicity. They get that from Synergy. So it's not a question, it's not part of the investigation. When they're filing their reports and when they're filing this data, that's where they go to get that information. So that's how that's found out. Those totals, again, do not represent unique students. There could be multiple, one student could have multiple information and data in this report. So you can see also that 43 of the 48 citation tickets were issued on victim-related crimes. That's an important point, but also remember that marijuana and marijuana leaf will contribute to these numbers, but they're not victim-related usually. So you see that there was one marijuana leaf citation issued. For Fort Collins Police Services to issue a citation for that, it must be 3 ounces or more before they will issue a citation. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, is this the first year that we have data available on these citations tickets, or do we have an idea of how it was in the past?
All this information that you've seen on the past 3 to 4 slides is all new this year.
Okay,
This is not information that was ever tracked until this year. So
Okay.
going forward, we will be able to have that comparative data from year to year.
Okay, thanks.
Felony filings, so this is always a good one to see trend down, and I think we're seeing it trend down every quarter. So you can see that Q3 had 1 felony filing, and it was for an assault. And again, you can see broken down by race and ethnicity by quarter on those. All felony filings are victim-related. So that's something to keep in mind there. There's laws that are having to be followed when there are victims. They have victim rights as well. So that's what drives a lot of the actual tickets that are issued here in the filings, and they go through the justice system. Any questions on that one? So LCSO data, our Larimer County Sheriff's Office, is a little different from Fort Collins Police Services. I reported in second quarter that they're working on aligning their information with the Fort Collins Police Services. They're working internally with their IT team to try to get that up and running. There was an expense related to getting the software and the process in place that Fort Collins Police Services used. So LCSO has opted to try to do that in-house. I think they're getting really close from what they've told us. So I'm hoping fourth quarter data will look a little different and a little bit more familiar with the Fort Collins Police Services. And then I will say there's no slide again for Timnath. Timnath is still that half-time employee for elementary schools starting next year with middle school, high school. Business may pick up for them a little bit over there. So we hope to have some data, and where we will work with them to try to align their data as well with the other 2 agencies so that we have similar data share and information to in your hands. So you can see here, part of the process for the Sheriff's Office is that they fill out a Google form. So it doesn't collect all the information that Fort Collins Police Services does. But they have had 53 calls since the beginning of school. 32 of those are displayed in the chart that you're seeing in front of you. And they really like to point out that they had 116 community engagement events. In the Fort Collins Police Services data, that looks like teaching in theirs. So if you want to compare that between the agencies, what's going on, that's sporting events, mentoring with staff and students, and teaching. So they've been trying to be strongly involved in their communities in Wellington and LaPorte. So it's been they've been a good partner this year. We've had a really good relationship building this year with a new SRO at CLP Middle School. That's gone really well, and so we're looking forward to that continued relationship there. Any questions on that LCSO data? So the interaction feedback form that we talked about, we did went live on March 4th. To date, and I did check last week, we have not received any interaction forms. The information is out in schools. The schools have been provided email templates, posters, web contact. As early as last week or the week before, principals again were reminded to make that prevalent in their schools so that people could see that. The business cards are available for the SROs and available in school offices. You can see there's the QR code that takes you to the form to fill out. And then we do have it in different languages so that we can get the message across to all of our students as much as possible. And hopefully that, positive or negative, we would love to see somebody or people use this, or staff or parent or students. We'd love to hear the positive as well. It's not all about if you have a bad experience. So we'll continue to promote that. We'll continue to market that and see if we need to increase that marketing a little bit more. To get some more use out of that if our current strategies are not working well. I want to thank Madeline's team for putting this together. I think they did a great job of designing it and putting it out there and getting it functional for us. Any questions on that?
Go ahead, Superintendent Kingsley.
I'd like to elevate a positive SRO interaction experience. We actually have an SRO in our presence tonight from Lincoln Middle School, Officer Stratton, who has volunteered to be able to answer the question that DJ asked regarding the general response. So if you wouldn't mind, Officer Stratton,
Perfect.
addressing the board, that we really appreciate your volunteerism and your presence. Thank you.
Yeah, we do appreciate that. I'll just say for the board that we're inviting him to answer this question. We're not going to pepper him with a lot of other questions.
And I
Okay.
appreciate him answering the
So,
question, too.
There you go. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dane Stratton. I'm the SRO at Lincoln Middle School, Putnam Irish PCA. So the question was brought up about what is SRP and what's our reaction to that. Is that fair? So SRP stands for Standard Response Protocol, which includes lockdowns, secure status, hold status, evacuations, things of that nature. So an instance when we would use that, for example, I've put Lincoln into hold status when we have an out-of-control student in the hallways. We want to keep students in their classroom. So that would be something that I initiate or administration initiates. A call for service is created with that, and then there's a disposition of SRP in our data. So typically that doesn't generate any other information other than the student was contained or controlled by primarily their teachers and staff and administration. Rarely SROs are involved with that, but we are. And then when we dispo our call for service, we'll also dispo that in the SRP with the SRP dispo code. Does that make sense? Okay.
Thanks so
Yes,
much.
thank
We
you very much.
appreciate it.
What's that?
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. You ever stood next to that guy? Man, you need to work out some more. Thank you for answering that. That saved me trying to get back to you, so I appreciate that, and I'm sorry I had that blank on that one. Any questions on this slide? Great. I'm hoping to bring you some data at some point, if we can get use. And this slide here, we like to put this at the end of the slide, since this is an outward-facing presentation and the public is able to view this. And we talk a lot about things in here that have mental health ramifications to them. We talk a lot about restorative justice and practices that we have, and we want to make sure that if anybody sees this presentation or watches this presentation and they feel like they have a need for some services, we want to show that these are the partners that we most commonly work with in our community. They're great partners. They do great work for us, and we like to put this information at the end of the presentations just so that we can make that awareness. And now we're at the end where I can take more questions, or you can give me some feedback about maybe what you want to see more of or less of or
Looks
different.
like DJ has something to say.
Yeah, so I was, if you go back to slide 6, it's the one where it's major discipline referral to enforcement, law enforcement. One of my wonderings when I went through this was, are we also tracking the data that doesn't go to the SROs, but that still is discipline in our schools to try to understand, like, the one that comes to mind is like fights, and does it, because not all of those warrants get to the SRO, my understanding.
Correct.
And so, to have an understanding of, like, there's been 20 fights, but we did a couple times have to call in the SROs. And so you kind of did that with this chart. And so I was wondering if we have that kind of data for some of the other categories and do our categories line up with what the Fort Collins Police does,
What
which,
the overlap is.
Yeah.
The connection there with maybe the dispositions or anything like that.
yeah.
Correct, okay.
And so to kind of give us an idea of the scope of what is happening in our schools and then what the SROs are having to be involved with.
Okay.
Does that make sense? And is that something you think is doable to share the whole picture, or is that?
So it's a great question, and this is a great follow-up to our discussion that we shared in our dinner session, as I was talking about Dr. Guile, Scott Nielsen, many other partners, Dr. Schmitz, Marlena Gross-Taylor, working with our principals recently on this very same problem of practice. So I'd love to invite Dr. Guile in to answer the question that you posed, if that's okay.
Oh, sure.
Tracy?
Yeah, you
Thanks.
bet. Thank you for the question. So one of the things that we've been working on is our Synergy system is where we enter discipline referrals as well as the dispositions. And so within that list in Synergy, there's probably about 100 different dispositions and different events that we can put in. And so some of that is some of them do align with referral to law enforcement. There's a specific checkbox that if we do refer something to law enforcement, that gets recorded in Synergy. But the categories that you see don't 100% align. And so as a collective group of K through 12 administrators, that's some work that's in front of us that we intend to do, not only to align what is a major and minor from school to school, but also to align those offenses as well as the dispositions that are in the system.
Yeah, I think that would be great to give us a better picture. And, the marijuana one that you also mentioned, where if it's not over 3 ounces, 2 ounces, if it is a lower one, we are still tracking it to see what the big picture is my point, I guess. So, thanks.
And to point out that PSD's level of tracking for marijuana or discipline action is much lower than that. So at 1 gram, a student is considered in the discipline program for that amount, for PSD.
All right, I don't see any other questions.
I've got an hour and a half.
No, no, you don't.
Director Pedersen, Director
Thanks, Matt.
Pedersen, I have a response to Director Donovan's question
Sure,
from
go ahead.
earlier. The
Go ahead.
phone a friend lifeline
Yeah,
came
go
through.
ahead.
So the question was about the Center for Family Outreach and what the typical session is. So typical session is 7 to 10 weeks. The Center for Family Outreach, they will do an intake appointment with the individual. And as part of that intake appointment, they'll do a drug test, and that determines the length of program that a student would need to go through to get a clean UA. And so it's varying depending upon the results of that program.
Thanks, Tracy. And thank you, Matt, very much.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
it. Oops,
much.
looked- No, we're not going to get the, DJ, go ahead.
Necessarily. It's one of the other things that came out about this that I thought would be good for us is the expulsion, a better understanding of the expulsion process for us as a board and being able to really wrap our head around it. It's something that Naomi brought up a couple times a few years ago, and I don't, at least I don't, maybe the rest of the board does, but I still don't feel like I completely comprehend how long they're in a school or how long they're sent away from, they might be expelled until, next year, but we do have opportunities or we do need to still teach them. So how are we doing it, and having that complete understanding would be something great to be able to wrap our head around a little better too.
That's definitely something we can prepare a presentation for the board. I think I'm seeing some body language that there's some general interest in that, so we can certainly work on that as a staff and bring it back to the board.
Appreciate it. And thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.